Well, I guess let's go ahead and get started here. So, I guess let me introduce myself. I haven't had a chance to do that. My name's CCNeverender. I work on Speed Docs, which is like a speedrunning documentary kind of channel deal.
Mm-hmm.
And CJ and I have been working on this for a while now. And yeah, it's nice to meet you.
Yep, nice to meet you guys.
I saw you at the relay race at GDQ 2017, or was it 2018?
2017, I believe. I think it was 2017, yeah.
That sounds right.
It's always confusing because it's like right at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. My gosh, was that this year? No. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, I guess go ahead and introduce yourself for the interview.
All right. Well, my name is Otto Bisno, better known as SilentWolf in the Donkey Kong Country community. I've been speedrunning the game intermittently since 2011, I believe.
Okay.
And yeah, there was a period in the middle of all that where I wasn't too involved in the scene, but the last couple of years I've definitely been a lot more into it.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why you came back, or you just felt like running again, or?
Well, I initially took a break just to focus on Melee.
Right.
Eventually, back then when I used to run the game, there wasn't as much of a community. It didn't have that community feel. There were no leaderboards, nothing like that really. There was just me and one other runner running the game, so there wasn't too much of a reason for me to stay really involved for a long time. But then once I saw that like there was a community, we had a wiki, we had leaderboards and stuff, it made me want to get a lot more involved. Once I started watching all the newer player streams and stuff, seeing that there was a scene for it, it made me want to get back into it.
Nice. That's good. Yeah, from what I can tell, there's really just you and SilentWolf, or not, sorry, you and TJP, sorry. You are SilentWolf.
Yeah.
You and TJP were pretty much the only people back in like 2011 and 12.
Yeah, and TJP dates back pretty far before that. I think he was the first like real runner of the game.
He might be.
I
know he did one in 2007.
For the sake of clarity, I'm just going to treat the Japanese version of the game as sort of its own thing, because there were Japanese players running the game. Sometimes were comparable to the American times, but there were version differences that were different enough to justify making the games different categories. So it was kind of tricky to cross compare them.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up. So Mapwork was eventually, or at some point, banned, I think in 2012, at your behest in order to better compare yourself with the Japanese community.
I don't think that's true. We initially weren't using map warp in the run for all stages, and I was actually an advocate of adding it into all stages at the time, just for the sake of skipping Orangutan Gang. No, I don't think that was the reason that we wanted to try and compare to them. There were already like plenty of differences between the games that just adding one more like that would only make it more complicated, in my opinion. The biggest difference being the Fanfare Skip in the US version. Saves like 50 seconds to a minute, I believe, being able to skip the fanfare after each stage. And you can't do that in the Japanese version. That, in addition to enemy placements in a handful of different stages, just pretty much warranted it being treated as its own thing. Map warp was just, I think there was an old category where you would beat 1-1, warp to World 3 immediately after, and then finish the game from there. And that was kind of its own category, so I think people just kind of didn't really see the need to implement map warp into all stages. But then there came a point where we considered, hey, maybe we could implement it just to skip this one stage so we could feature this cool trick in the run.
Right. Okay.
In hindsight, most people don't see it as a cool trick anymore. It's actually like pretty tedious, but at the time that was the thought behind it, as far as I remember.
I gotcha. Okay. Although I don't mean to be antagonistic, but I am reading the forum post. The main reason I would like to keep the any % no warp glitch run without the Orangutan Gang glitch is because that is the way the Japanese have been doing it on their rankings as well as myself.
Oh.
This is important to me because I would like to stay true to that format because the Japanese are top competitors and I would like to beat their times fairly while at the same time being able to compete with TJP. That is a direct quote from you on the forum post. So.
Okay, well, I can't argue with that. I guess I still was really like trying to compare myself to them as best as I could. But in hindsight, they probably should be treated as separate categories as they are today.
Yeah, I've been told that like there's too many differences to really compare them. So yeah, it just ends up being like, why are we even trying? I think even like a few months later, like I see you again in the forums, like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, probably not the best idea, but we're doing it anyway. So.
Yeah, so if you guys want, I can talk about a little bit of the history that goes before like the world record progression on the leaderboards currently, because there is some stuff that dates before that. That's
sure
a little different.
Absolutely,
a little tricky to include. So as far as I know, the first documented record was by TJP, and this was in spring of 2007. And the thing with running the game back then is that we didn't use RTA, we used in-game time.
Mm-hmm.
So his time was actually an in-game time of 32 minutes. So none of the times on the record history on the leaderboards document the in-game timing era. And it was also a segmented speed run back then, meaning we didn't do the whole run just from start to finish. They would, or TJP, I suppose, he was the one doing it at this time. He would save at each save point in the game and then do each segment from there individually. Sort of like a spliced run, but not really because you're not trying to pass it off as a full run.
Right.
And, yeah, it was way different back then, and I think it was because standards for speedrunning were so much lower. Like, nobody really expected somebody to get a meaningful time beating the whole game all at once, so it was seen as sort of necessary to do that, I suppose.
Yeah, back in the day, it's weird. Segmented runs were a really big, popular thing in sort of the mid 2000s and sort of even to like 2010 or so. But then after that, eventually RTA became the big thing.
Yeah, once people started beating those times with single segment runs, then people kind of woke up and were like, okay, like, I don't think we really need to do segmented runs anymore.
I would be interested to see what, segmented runs would be like nowadays if people brought them back.
But... Yeah, so continuing off of that, the next record I think was set by TJP as well. And this was an in-game time of 31 minutes in spring of 2011. And where you would typically look to find these records at the time was SDA, or Speed Demos Archive.
Right.
But the problem with that was they were very anal about accepting runs, so it would take a long time before games were accepted. So even though that time was set in 2011, it wasn't until later in 2012 when it was actually posted on there. So during this gap, I started running the game myself, and I was going off the basis of, okay, it's based on in-game time, I'm allowed to do a segmented run. So I was actually cooking up my own segmented run, trying to employ like all of the craziest strats I could find, like the barrel boost at the end of 1.5, under the beaver and Winky's walkway. And it wasn't until that time was released on Speed Demos Archive when I saw that he actually was doing a single segment run, and I just kind of dropped that and realized that I needed to shift gears.
I gotcha.
And then
I believe that run was in April 26, 2011. I think I found it. It's like a run of 37.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
And I think he got a 37.14 in March of 2012. That's what I have written here. And that was the first time somebody using the US copy of the game actually did an RTA run of the game rather than using the in-game time.
Right.
Okay. And it's important to bear in mind that even though we were doing RTA at this time, the timing was a little bit different than how we do it today. Like today, when we're doing a speed run, we start the time on game start and end it once the banana hits the ground once you beat K Rool. But back then, we were using the Japanese timing, where the time would start upon resetting the console and end after the blackout of beating K. Rool. So there was an extra, like half a minute or so added onto those times.
Okay. I believe it's something around 20-something seconds.
Yeah,
So
it's
right.
something like that. But yeah, that was the first run where it actually became RTA. Was in 2012. And I think that's where the record history on the leaderboards kind of picks up.
I think that's correct. Although I think the 3711 is also on there.
Okay.
Because there's 2 TJP runs and then your run.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
Haven't taken a look at that in a while. But I just knew there were a handful of weird in-game time, possibly segmented runs dating back before that, and it was probably like too convoluted and not really worth it to put on there. But I think it's important to document the early history of the game as well.
I agree with that. I did end up finding those runs at some point. I think I just used the Google like time frame search and like searched anything before 2011, and I come up with a few things.
Yeah, I believe they're still on TJP's YouTube. I think that's how I found them.
Two of them are. Hang on, let me double check. Some of them are on archive.org because they're like in 7 segments.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you? I guess at some point you probably gave up on the Japanese. Not gave up on them, but you stopped comparing to them. Do you keep up with them at all within their community, or you just kind of once you stopped kind of trying to compare, you kind of ignored them?
They've kind of just integrated themselves within our community. Everyone who takes the game seriously, Japanese, American, no matter where they're from, they run pretty much the same version of the game at this point.
Okay.
Because that's just where the competition's at, and ultimately that's what most people are interested in.
That's fair. Yeah, even if it's not the best category, a lot of times one category ends up being the most competitive, and it's like
yeah, but it's usually the category with the most history behind it.
Yeah, since competition's fun and all, people will usually gravitate towards those.
You always want to play something that other people are playing as well, just to feel like you're not alone out there.
Were there any other runners besides you and TJP? Like, was it literally just you two? I think the next person I see on the list is like Closty. But was there anybody else?
So after I had gotten the record in 2012, I think TJP beat it right after that, and then I kind of stopped paying attention. There, like I said, there wasn't really like as far as I knew, there wasn't really a place where communities communicated. Maybe on the IRC or speedrun.com, but I never really like delved into that. I wasn't really on the SDA forums too much. So as far as I knew, until like more times showed up that were faster than TJP's, I'm not really sure who was running the game at that point.
I gotcha. Yeah, besides like Skype groups and Discord, like before that, it's really hard to find places that don't have like a dedicated website. Like it's hard to find a lot of community stuff before then. So I guess around 2013 is when Twitch kind of got popular. So I see a lot of people on Twitch. So like Closty shows up on Twitch, and then PG shows up for that era too.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So you stepped away in sort of late 2012 or mid 2012 after your world record run?
Yeah, sometime around then.
Okay.
And I still loosely kept up with the game for the next few years, but I kind of put it on the back burner just to focus on Super Smash Bros.
Gotcha. Let's see here. Were you around for the whenever they brought Mapwork back? Or were you paying attention, or were you a part of that conversation at all?
I don't remember there being a conversation. I vaguely remember TJP just doing it in one of his runs, and then it kind of just became the standard from that, but I could be wrong about that.
Apparently, I've been told in 2014, like in an IRC chat somewhere, they're like, should we just do our map warp again? And they're like, yeah. So
okay, I would probably listen to that.
So okay, well, I just wasn't sure if you were around, like because you said you had it on the back burner. So
yeah, I do remember one of TJP's times. It was either the 3714 or the one before that, where he did use the map warp in O-Gang, but it might have been like unofficial at that point. Maybe runners decided not to do it for a period of time. I can't remember the specifics on that, but I do think he did actually do that in one of his runs.
His 3714, he does use the map warp.
Okay, yeah.
Then you do your run, and then he does not use his run after that.
Okay. Did I? I'm not even sure if I did it in my run.
You do not use it in your run.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here. So besides map warp, what are some of the big differences between you and Jay?
As I mentioned before, the fanfare skipping, I think it's about 52 seconds, plus or minus a couple seconds difference. And random enemy placements in a few, well, not random, there's just a few stages that have slightly different enemy placements, so this affects the movement in some ways.
Okay.
Okay, for the Japanese version of the game, I think some of the frame perfect tricks, the jump rolls, are possible, but they just weren't really allowed. So, whereas we did allow them on the American version. And it's been a while since I actually really dug into the version differences, but I believe that the minecart glitch in Minecart Madness, where you roll through the air, does not work in the Japanese version. I could be wrong about that, but I think there were a few of the glitches that didn't quite work on the Japanese version as well, so it also made it difficult to define a clear code category between both games.
Yeah, the Japanese version was like patched, which is weird because it's like usually the other way around. Because what I'm trying to say, like usually because games are made in Japan and then moved over to the United States.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny how that worked out backwards. So no one has really mentioned Fanfare Skip in the interviews. So while we're thinking about it, can I have you just explain to me what Fanfare Skip is?
Yeah, so at the end of each level, there's a little jingle that it plays. It's like, and the Kongs do a little dance. And then you wait for that to end before proceeding down the path to the next stage. In versions 1.0 and 1.1, I believe, of the American version, you can just mash any of the face buttons, and after a second or two, that whole animation will be canceled. And it really adds up throughout the course of the run. But you cannot do that on the Japanese version of the game, or on version 1.2 of the American version of the game.
All right, perfect. Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up for us. We didn't have a huge list of questions, but I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, no problem.
I guess from a personal standpoint, do your hands let you play Smash Ultimate at all?
Yeah, my hands are actually doing really well these days. I have been choosing to play other games, though. I've only dabbled in Ultimate.
Okay.
Been playing more Melee for fun. Getting back into speedrunning some other SNES games.
That's good. I'm glad to hear your hands are doing good though.
Yeah, thank you.
I think 2017 you announced your retirement, and I was really sad.
Yeah, and I'll still probably be retired. I just don't really have it in me to play competitively anymore, but I still have interest in playing.
I gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you for hanging out, man. Thanks for talking to us.
Yeah, no problem.
I think CJ had to step away for something, so he's not here right now, but I know that he appreciates it as well.
I appreciate you. I'm sorry about that.